All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. I'm in my home of the internet, which is where we all live now, and I always feel the need to preface the show by saying that, even though everyone is online all the time because no one can meet in person. But one of the things that's cool about the city is that, I've been doing this show for about 8 years now, and over the course of doing that podcast, there's a lot of other people who are coming up who are starting their own shows, and there's definitely a community growing of podcasters in Winnipeg. And the guest on this episode is also a musician, but I would like to start off, I think, by talking about your podcast because, that's obviously something that I can relate to doing this myself. And it's very cool to see someone, doing a similar kind of show to mine in the sense that you're interviewing musicians and talking about music. But before we get into any of that, if you want to just introduce yourself and give a bit of background, I guess, about how you got into this.
Awesome. Okay, so my name is Gregory Marshall Hyman. A lot of people also know me as GMH or GMH Rocks. Back in, I want to say April, I started a podcast called Talkin' Rock with GMH, where I can essentially talk about my opinions with music and rock music, metal music, all sorts of different music with other musicians so that I can hear their take on, the musical process and hear about their musical journey or their time as a musician. And I also do some music myself. I've been playing guitar for such a long, not a pretty long, a pretty good chunk of my life. And I've also been I also play drums and sing, and I have a project called GMH Rocks where I put out, alternative rock, alternative folk, singer, songwriter, all that sort of different stuff. And yeah.
Cool. Well, I think one of the things that's interesting is that, when I got into podcasting, I was already 30 when I started my podcast. I'm not sure how old you are, but I get the impression you're considerably younger than me. And you have, I think, a very good the fact that you're doing this now is awesome. Because, first of all, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm turning 13 in 10 days.
Okay, so I have a kid who's a couple of years younger than you. So you're definitely a different age range here. But the fact that you're doing this now is awesome because when I was your age, we didn't have podcasting wasn't a thing. There wasn't an opportunity to just sit down and record things and talk to musicians like you're doing. Like you're having an opportunity to get kind of hands-on info from people whose work you appreciate and that you like, and it's a really cool thing. So hopefully by the time you're my age, you will have been doing this for for a long enough time that you're ahead of the game, I think, is what I'm trying to say. So why did you choose podcasting as the route to take for this?
So I always loved just talking about music, like going to friends' houses who really don't care about music the same way I do, and just spitting out random facts about my favorite bands and all that sort of stuff, and me not really having an outlet to tell people about that sort of stuff, and then my friends and family just being all confused why I'm talking about this. And I'm like, why don't I just talk to whoever actually wants to listen about my fascination with music, bands. And I essentially, I wanted to start by actually just talking about, news and rock and metal music. And I started that by actually doing my pilot episode, I should say, while just talking about what was going on with the world of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly realized that in the pandemic we're in, there wasn't a lot of stuff to talk about at that time.
Nothing's happening, yeah.
With tours getting canceled. So I asked my friend Joaquim if he wanted to come on the next episode to talk about his band. And from there, I just started having guests on to talk about their music so that I could have, people who listen to these artists who also listen to the podcast hear about these other musicians.
Yeah. What has the response been so far? I mean, you've had a lot of guests on your show that I know personally, and a lot of musicians that I've listened to as well, for sure. But so I'm assuming some of their audience is picking up on what you're doing as well. Have you had a good reception?
Yeah, it's been interesting, the fact that getting listeners on a podcast and getting listeners on Spotify for your personal music is completely different in the fact that just how the algorithm works and how it's displayed. So I've actually been pretty fortunate with the podcast to getting a decent amount of people to listening to want to listen to me and other musicians talk about music and their musical journeys. And what's been pretty awesome for me is to, I guess, have the odd band from Manitoba on, then to have bands that I've listened to for as long as I can remember on the show, and to talk about their music. So that's been a super awesome component. And I mean, I'm still, my podcast isn't even a year old, so I still have a lot of opportunity with special guests and listeners to fill. But yeah, it's been good. Even I remember a friend who doesn't live in Winnipeg messaged me, and he's like, I only listen to rap and hip hop, but your podcast is super amazing. Super interesting hearing you talk to these musicians. So I just decided to keep it going and to, just have like the odd conversation with musicians, like I said, whether that's from around Canada, Winnipeg, or even Europe and all over the world, musicians that I can get on when possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really cool that you're doing it again. Like, I wish I had been doing this when I was your age. I would have had so much more time to work on so many more episodes. But I mean, what has the interview experience been like with interviewing people? Because I mean, I work as a journalist in not on radio, but I write news for a living, and went to journalism school. Like, interviews is something that I've got a lot of training and experience doing, and I feel comfortable with. But what was that like for you? I mean, obviously you're coming to this fairly cold and talking to some artists, like you said, that you've listened to for your whole life. So did you have a lot of nerves when you were doing that, or concerns about kind of how you would come across as an interviewer?
It depends on, I guess, the episode. Sometimes I'll just stick to a regular set of questions with definitely modifications, but a little bit of a template. But it really depends on the musician. So, for example, with I was for my episode that's out as of February 12th, I was fortunate enough to get one of my biggest inspirations as a guitarist and musician, Rob Baker from the Tragically Hip.
Holy crap, so that's ridiculous.
I was able to speak to him, which was, like, to be honest, a dream come true. So little things like that. So those are always exciting too. Even just small interviews talking with musicians who I really appreciate. So, for example, like Exo Merida, one of the first ones that come to my mind, although they are still they're just getting started with their music, and I think they're amazing, but just getting to talk to them about their music and their process with their music, and their super cool
they're nice guys,
sound, and super nice guys. So just from that to that is just amazing to talk with these guys.
Well, just looking at some of the people on your list of guests, I mean, you have people from the Watchmen, like you said, you have guitarists from the Hip. What kind of music are you into? Because I don't necessarily think the Watchmen is a band that people are going to assume someone in your age group is necessarily a fan of, right? And I mean, you seem to be very heavy on the rock side of things. What kind of stuff did you grow up listening to?
It's always been like the classic rock stuff, and then this has helped a lot with the podcast, but over the summer I guess came across a slight obsession with 90s alternative rock band. So the Watchmen, Our Lady Peace, Odds, Moist, the Hip, of course. Always loved the Hip. So just sort of it's definitely been rock. Also, I'm pretty open. I'll listen to anything. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan when it comes to pop music, but I love the rock and metal for sure. And then Also, I do have a lot of appreciation for singer-songwriter and folk and I guess experimental alternative sort of stuff.
What is the appeal to you for some of that 90s alt rock stuff? Because, those bands you mentioned, when I was your age, that's what was happening. I remember when the first Moist album came out, I still have the tape. Like that was kind of my era of growing up, being in junior high, starting to get into music heavily. So what do you think has made that stuff kind of stand the test of time? Because it's decades later now, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
you would assume that, I mean, it's maybe a wrong assumption, but someone your age would be listening to something more contemporary. But there definitely are a lot of people who are younger who are going back to that 90s stuff. So what is the appeal for you? Like, what do you think draws you to it?
I'm not 100% sure what it is. Like, for example, when it comes to the Watchmen, their first record compared to their record in 1998, I think I might
Silent
be wrong
Radar?
on that date, but Silent Radar, yeah. McLaren Furnace Room, their first record, just is so amazing in my opinion. I just like that raw sound, that almost nearly live off the floor sound, and it just sounds amazing to me. And even like Moist, who I don't really listen to as much compared to the other bands I mentioned, but Moist, for example, their earlier recordings compared to recordings of rock songs now compared to Moist, although it's, I guess, nothing compared to today's the quality that you can get from just like a laptop, it still sounds to me super amazing, and it's almost like I'm listening to a concert in my just with headphones on. So there's just it's just really easy for me to listen to, and I appreciate the melodic part of things as well, and all that sort of stuff.
What is your what has it been like for you with your own music? I mean, obviously we're in a pandemic right now, so no one is playing any kind of shows or anything like that. But is there any kind of infrastructure here in the city for you to play shows? Because you can't play bar shows, and there was an all ages scene like back, in late '90s, early 2000s. There's a pretty big punk all ages scene, but I'm not sure what's happened with that. In the years since, had you been playing shows or trying to play shows before all of this happened?
Yes and no. So I really stepped up my playing music when I turned to busking, which started in Clear Lake and then moved to busking at the Forks, being up there in the summer, like 3 times a week almost. And of course that can't happen right now, but that was amazing because these people would walk by and would just really appreciate what I was playing, and that just meant a lot to me. And that's when I started fiddling around again with the name GMH Rocks. That had just been a YouTube channel name and a little bit of a joke. Doesn't have a whole lot of meaning besides the fact that GMH is my initials. So I was able to sort of busk a lot, which helped me with being able to play in front of a crowd. And then I started, and then I really only played one show. I'm not really sure if you'd classify it as a show. It was sort of practicing in front of a few people at Bulldog Event Center. It was just a little event they were doing, and I was able to do a little acoustic set, which was cool. I did a lot of covers, and then over the pandemic, I went back to old originals I had, and fiddling around with writing. And writing is not a strong suit for me, but definitely working on getting originals is extremely important to me, for sure.
Are you hoping that once the pandemic eases and things get back to some semblance of normality, that do you want to be playing more shows? Like, do you think that this experience of doing all these interviews and talking to all these artists during the pandemic, has that kind of inspired you to want to get out there and try new things and get your name out there?
Yeah. So I don't really know what things will look like, but
no one does.
Yeah, no one does. But I'm so much looking forward to. Basically, in the summer, I was able to practice with a little live band I have outside, and we were able to have it with all like the COVID precautions at the time. And like July compared to now, like July was honestly a great month one of the best throughout this pandemic, to be honest. And I was able to practice with the band, and it was just so exciting to hear my original songs being played with other guys. And I just can't wait to play in front of other people, especially with the band, just not acoustically, which is something I do quite often, because I'm able to put, I guess, a more creative and personal side into recordings. But I'm all up to playing with other people live, so I cannot wait to start playing live again.
Do you think that this process of doing the podcast and meeting all these artists, do you think that might help you get some shows in future? I mean, hopefully if there are shows at some point.
Honestly, I do, in the sense that, I mean, especially with local musicians, that there are ones that I've stayed a little bit more connected with, and maybe in the future there's a little bit of a collaboration or a show there.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So if people want to find your podcast and your music, what's the best option for them to track you down online?
Instagram, I'm there a lot. I post constant updates, so GMH_Rocks on Instagram. Also, you can find me on Spotify. So I have an album which is basically 11 demos of original songs. And it's called Basement, and it was a little pandemic project. And you can check that out on basically everywhere. Just type in GMH Rocks, like Spotify, iTunes, all that stuff. And we've got new stuff coming soon, which is we got a new song coming out called I Remember, which is a super awesome song in my opinion. Definitely very different from my album Basement, and for sure a step up. And I'm really excited for people to hear it, because I think people are going to like this one.
Cool. And that's, like you said, it's available in all the usual places where people find music online. Yeah. Are you is GMH Rocks, is that the final name you're going to use, or is that just what you're kind of stuck with because you start? I ask as someone who has a stupid name that he's stuck with for a podcast over the past few years. Not to imply that your name is stupid, but you know what I mean, right? Like it sounds like it was a placeholder for you, and then now you're kind of wrapping this up. Are you going to stick with that name, or do you have designs to change that up?
It depends. For as long as I can, I'm going to stick with the name. I just, when I did that show at Bulldog Pizza that I was telling you about, the weird thing is, for, I guess, the event poster, it was, I guess, the caption, I should say, was like, it was like, come see 12-year-old GMH Rocks. And I'm just like, oh, okay. But yeah, so I would like to stick with it because I think it's funny. My friends know me as GMH. I've just sort of had this going. And for the people that don't necessarily get it, like somebody was like, oh, GHM Rocks, and like getting the letters mixed up, all that sort of stuff. But to be completely honest, I think it's a fun name, and I have no problem saying I'm Gregory Hyman, but I go by, I release music under GMH Rocks. So yeah. Do
you what you just said there about the poster and the way it described you? Do you not want to have yourself marketed as a kid playing music, basically? Like, would you prefer that wasn't sort of what people are advertising it as? Because I noticed your podcast, you don't outright say that, right? And listening to it, it's not necessarily clear either, right away that you're as young as you are. So is that something you're trying to avoid, or do you want to how do you feel about that whole thing of people knowing your age?
I guess I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I'm just a nearly 13-year-old who is like, firstly, on my podcast, every depends who it is, but every time somebody is asked, they're like, what are you, like, middle of high school or something like that? And I'm like, no, I'm actually only in grade 7. But I guess the fact that I'm like 5'10" and I do what I'm doing, all this sort of stuff, I guess it can throw people off. So I have no problem being placed with my age. I don't really have a problem with that. I just feel that I'm not gonna let that stop showcasing, I guess, my music and my podcast. And like the podcast, like I said, is really up to the people who listen and the people who come on to the show, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, you don't want it to become a gimmick either, right? You don't want to be like, oh, here's this guy, look how old he is. He's playing music. You want people to like your music kind of, sight unseen, right? And just hear the songs, and if they dig it, they dig it, rather than having this
Yeah.
preconceived notion of who you are and what you are and how old you are and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, when I listened back to Basement, my record, I have mixed opinions on it because it was a pandemic process project during online school and just caught in the midst of not knowing what was going on. I'm just like, oh, I'm going to do an album. I have songs, so I'm just going to release an album. So that's sort of what I went with, but definitely the new stuff is the nice thing about the new stuff that's coming is for sure a demonstration of what I'm hearing and what I'm visioning it's going to sound like, or what I'm hearing it's in my head what it's going to sound like. So I hope that definitely draws attention to people listening.
How do you feel like, how do you think this stuff's going to hold up for you when you're 5 years older, 10 years older? And the reason I ask is because my first band, I was also in grade 7, and I have recordings of it. They're very poorly done because it was 1994 and we just had a tape deck in the middle of the room, and so the audio quality is terrible. But I mean, the songs are somewhat, they're endearing but also awful when I look back at them. And so have you given a thought to what this stuff will sound like? Do you think that you are, I guess, like fully matured as a songwriter at this point because you are so young? And do you worry that maybe some of this stuff, the fact that it's out there and you're putting it on the internet and anyone can hear it, do you have any concerns that maybe you will have changed so much in 5 years or so that musically that maybe you won't want this stuff to be floating around online anymore?
I don't. I mean, sometimes when people think that their record or whatever they have out is not a proper representation of them, they take it down, but that's just part of my process. And if my new stuff in 3 years sounds completely different than my stuff from 2020, well, so be it, I guess. People can listen to what they choose. There is, although it's not necessarily my favorite, there's a lot of songs on Basement that people do enjoy and continue to listen to. So
good.
It's good. The nice thing is you can I never really have to stop doing music wherever life takes me. So even if I probably won't, but like even if I probably won't take this full time at all, but I can still always play music and release music, which is the super awesome thing that doesn't really have to change. So
that's awesome. Well, I'm glad you're doing the music. I'm glad you at this point in your young career, it's like the fact that you are able to record all this stuff and you have the technology to do this at home and make an album in your basement during a quarantine and stuff. It's awesome. Like I'm very jealous of that kind of equipment being available and that kind of the ease of doing it, because you can just record something, throw it up online, everyone can hear it. And I wish that existed when I was your age, for sure. And also the podcast, it's like I said at the beginning, it's always nice to see more podcasters in the city. Mm-hmm. We have a nice community that we've built through the Manitoba Podcast Festival and everything like that. So hopefully we can get you involved in some of that stuff if you're interested, and you can meet some of the other people in the community. And it's good because I'm an old guy. I'm almost 40, and I have a kid who's a year younger than you, and I'm talking to musicians, and my perspective, I'm sure, is very different from yours. Even if we're talking to the same artists, I'm sure that we have a different way of looking at things. So I'm happy you're here, happy you're doing this, and keep going, man. It's good to see.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.